Today on Alex Autos, we're out here taking a look at the 2015 RAM ProMaster City. I recently was able to drive one at a launch event, so there's another video on my channel about this vehicle. But this video will go into the ProMaster City in a little bit more detail, and it will also help answer questions that you all had on that video that I recently released. The ProMaster City is a compact cargo vehicle at heart. It's not really a minivan, so it has a very different mission in mind than the Caravan, the Town & Country, the Odyssey, or something like the Toyota Sienna. That means that while you can get a 5-passenger version of the ProMaster City, there is no 7-passenger version like you will find in the Ford Transit Connect. This vehicle is designed specifically to compete with the Ford Transit Connect, the Nissan NV200, and the Chevy City Express, which is really just an NV200 with a Chevy logo on the front. The ProMaster City's mission is a little bit more firmly defined than the Transit Connect, because the Transit Connect is trying to be both a cargo vehicle like this and a minivan. And that's why you'll find a 7-passenger configuration of that Transit Connect, and you'll also find leather seats, dual-zone climate control, goodies like that you normally find in the passenger side of this segment. Nissan's NV200 and the Chevy City Express are 2-passenger cargo only. There are 2 basic trim levels for the ProMaster City. There's the base and then there's the SLT. The base model, like we're taking a look at right here, has this black body cladding below, and we can't get fog lights. If you get the SLT version in either Wagon or the cargo van, we get body-colored moldings, we also get some slightly different mirrors, and we have the option for fog lights. The front end of the ProMaster City is a little bit unusual looking, but I think it's much better than the previous generation of the Ford Transit Connect. Now, the current Transit Connect is by far the most attractive entry in this segment. I think the NV200 comes in a little bit below this. At 187 inches long, the ProMaster City is definitely smaller than your average American minivan. However, this slots right in between its direct competitors, so it's a little bit longer than the Nissan NV200, and it's a little bit shorter than the long wheelbase Transit Connect. The important thing to know when comparing this with the competition is that the short wheelbase Transit Connect, which is a little bit less expensive, ends right about here, and you don't get the same kind of interior cargo volume in that Ford. When taking a look at the Wagon versions, which are available from Ford and from Chrysler, it's important to know that this vehicle is available only in a 5-passenger variety, whereas the Transit Connect is either 5 or 7 passengers. The important thing to know there is if you want the long wheelbase passenger version of the Transit Connect, it's 7-passenger only. So there's no variety that's quite like this where there's a large cargo area and 5 passengers with the long body, unless you choose the taxi version of that Transit Connect. The most obvious difference between this and your average American minivan is that we don't have a hatchback in the ProMaster City. Instead, we have these bi-folding rear doors. It's a 60/40 side folding door. This means you can get a forklift up to this vehicle and put pallets inside, which is pretty tricky if you have a traditional hatchback that flips up. That's an important consideration when you're comparing this to certain versions of the Transit Connect, because the Transit can have either side opening doors like this or it can have a traditional hatch. When it comes to cargo hauling, what really separates this from your average American minivan is this very vertical rear hatch that makes it an awful lot more practical for loading items in the back. If you were trying to repurpose your average American minivan like a Grand Caravan, then you need to know that it has a much more sloping rear glass, so it's much harder to stick large square items in there. The rear hatch is a 60/40 folding arrangement. We have a single windshield wiper over here on the 60% side that is optional. 40% side just has a defogger grid. Making cargo loading a little bit more practical, the doors do open and they stay in position. You can also open them a little bit further by pressing a release on the inside there, and you can open them almost 90 degrees to the side of the vehicle. When it comes to carrying long items, you should know that the 60 portion of the 60 folding rear door does not latch into place on its own. It does require that 40 portion to be latched first. And because this 40 portion is on the passenger side of the vehicle, when this is latched, your long items would have to go right up to the driver's seat. So you couldn't remove the front passenger seat, leave one side open, and have longer items hang out the back. Under the hood, we don't get any of Fiat's diesel engines or manual transmissions. We just get the same 2.4-liter 4-cylinder engine that you'll find in a variety of other Chrysler products. It produces 178 horsepower and 174 pound-feet of torque, and it's mated to their new 9-speed automatic transmission that was designed by ZF of Germany. That's about the same kind of power that you can get out of the 1.6-liter turbocharged engine from Ford. It's a little bit more than Ford's base 2.4-liter engine in the Transit Connect, and it's notably more than you'll find in the NV200. It's right about 48 horsepower more. Thanks to the 9-speed automatic transmission, we get 21 miles per gallon city, 29 highway, and 24 combined. But if you treat this engine gently out on the open highway, you can expect much better than 30 miles per gallon, especially at higher speeds, thanks to this 9-speed automatic. The 9-speed automatic seriously improves fuel economy over about 75 miles an hour or so. I really don't expect many people to tow with their ProMaster City, but should you want to, you can tow up to 2,000 pounds with this vehicle when properly equipped. You should know that that's decently less than a Dodge Caravan with the 3.6-liter V6 engine, which will tow about 3,600 pounds. When it comes to cargo hauling, the ProMaster City gives the highest weight capacity of any vehicle in this segment at just over 1,800 pounds. That's a decent amount above the Transit Connect, even in the long wheelbase variety. Obviously, in the wagon version that we're looking at right here, weight capacity is reduced because we do have this second row bench seat. Part of the wagon package is this rear cladding on the back of the vehicle. We have an optional rear speaker package. Our particular vehicle does not get it because we are in the base model vehicle. If you got the SLT, you would have that option. 12-volt power outlet right down here. Cargo capacity is a little bit bigger than you might think, and it's also a lot squarer than you might think. You can very easily put a 4-foot by 4-foot by 4-foot block right here in the wagon version. If we had the cargo version, you could put 7-foot items from the front seat backs all the way to the back and still close the doors. In the wagon version, that's a little bit trickier because these seats do take up some of that room. In terms of cargo height from the ceiling to the floor, it came in at 46 inches, which is just about the same as the Grand Caravan. If you're one of those people that really likes to load your vehicle up, the distance from the glass on the dashboard to the back hatch is 11 feet. It's the longest item you could stick in here as long as it was not too thick. If you're looking at the ProMaster City Cargo and you remove the front passenger seat, you could put items up to 9'6" on the inside, all the way from the back, all the way to the dashboard. Front seat comfort ranges from 6 out of 10 points to 8 out of 10 points. It depends on which version you get. The base model that we're taking a look at right here does not have adjustable lumbar support, and that's something this seat really needs because there's not a whole lot going on in the base form. The recline mechanism is a knob, which I find a little bit less handy than a lever, and the seat doesn't move quite as far back as I had expected. And that's because we have an awful lot of headroom right here. I have probably about 8 inches of headroom between the top of my head and the roof. This front seat is all the way back in its tracks, which means that taller drivers may find this a little bit more comfortable as long as they find the legroom to be accommodating enough. To help that out, we do have a tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion that's definitely different than you'll find in the full-size ProMaster, which does not get a tilting telescoping steering column. It simply telescopes, it doesn't tilt. When it comes to rear passenger comfort, I'll give this 9 out of 10 points. We do have very comfortable rear seats, and they're also higher off the floor than I had expected. We have an awful lot of room, even if I move over here to the middle seat, and we have adjustable headrests for all 3 seating positions. The center headrest moves up far enough that it's not hitting me strangely in the back. For a European vehicle, this rear bench seat is also quite wide, so that makes it an awful lot easier to fit 3 child seats across the back. Once folded, you can put cargo right on top, and you can fit 7-foot items to the driver's seat as long as the driver's seat is moved far enough forward. We can then tumble the rear seats forward into this position if you want to put bulkier items in the back, but that does of course reduce the amount of distance between the second row and the back. This is not quite as handy as the Ford Transit seats, which do fold almost completely into the floor, giving you a flat load area. A question that I've been asked frequently about the ProMaster City is this second row removable? Yes, if you consider unbolting the seat from the vehicle removable, then yes, they are. You do need to keep in mind that you will have to tighten those bolts properly, and sometimes certain manufacturers will say that you have to replace the bolts after you've removed a seat and reinstalled it. Chrysler was not very specific on the ProMaster City. When it comes to my exclusive trunk comfort index, I'm going to have to give this 8 out of 10 points. This is the largest cargo area among its direct competitors. It's a lot easier to put cargo in here than the Nissan NV200 because we get a little bit more width in the back. However, you cannot fit 4x8 items in the ProMaster City. If you need to fit 4x8 items, you'll have to step up to your regular old passenger minivan, something like a Dodge Grand Caravan or a Chrysler Town & Country. When taking a look specifically at the passenger carrying vehicles like we're taking a look at right here, I found the Transit Connect to be a little bit more handy because of the way the seats fold into the floor. I also think that the larger Grand Caravan is a more practical vehicle if you're trying to combine cargo carrying capacity as well as passenger capacity. Of course, you can't bring a forklift up to the back of your Grand Caravan because we don't have these split folding doors. That really is a big advantage in the ProMaster City. An interesting touch back here is that we can obviously get a tonneau cover for the ProMaster City. However, I haven't seen it available on Chrysler's options list, so you may have to get that from Italy from a Fiat dealer, but it does look like it's an option in the back. Another consideration in my trunk comfort index is that we don't have a spare tire. You would normally find it right here under the vehicle, but it is optional. That helps give you higher load capacity. It also helps reduce the weight of the vehicle. Although not standard, a full-size spare tire is available, and again, it would go right here under the rear of the vehicle. Going for our usual quick spin around the interior, we have height adjustable seat belts for both the driver and the front passenger and two-way adjustable headrests. On the front doors, you'll notice some interesting Europeanisms about the ProMaster City because, of course, this is based on the Fiat Doblo. We have the same door handles and door locks. This is actually a combination door release and door lock. You push down to lock the door, you pull up, this is the unlock position. If you want to actually open the door, you pull further up and that actually opens the door. It's not possible to lock the door while the door is opened to help keep you from locking your keys in the vehicle. As you'd expect from any commercial vehicle, the front doors are made out of easy-to-clean, hard-touch plastics. If we look towards the bottom of this door, we actually find a large storage cubby right there with two bottle holders instead of just one. Moving over to the dashboard, we have a lockable, moderately sized glove box. It is this drop-down bin style. We can fit a small tablet computer right in there very easily. We have some additional storage located right above the glove compartment and a large air vent to either side. Although this looks very much like the larger Uconnect that you'll find in other Chrysler and Ram vehicles, this is actually based on Microsoft's operating system rather than QNX. If we move out, you'll notice that it is housed in a large binnacle right there, front and center. We have additional buttons right down there below, fog lamps, rear defroster, and the menu system for the trip computer. Continuing down the dashboard, we have a single zone manual climate control, and you'll find the auxiliary input and USB input for that Uconnect system right there. We have a very traditional shifter with a manual mode. It's all the way down and over to the left. Continuing our way down that dashboard, we do have one cup holder right there. It is very large, followed by two power outlets. And then if we look further down between the rear seats, you'll notice we have that other cup holder right there at the back. Moving up to the ceiling, we have some additional storage right there above the sun visors all the way across the front. The ProMaster City uses a unique steering wheel. It definitely looks like a Fiat steering wheel, so it is somewhat familiar if you drive a Fiat 500 or 500L. Cruise control buttons over here on this side, phone hang-up pickup button, voice command button, and mute button. You'll find the radio controls on the back of the steering wheel, volume up, down on this side, track forward and backward on this side. The instrument cluster is a basic, very European-styled instrument cluster. We got our speedometer right over here, tachometer on the right, engine temperature and fuel level with a multifunction trip computer right there in the middle. The trip computer is controlled via a stalk on the side of the steering column as well as some buttons on the dashboard. You can see we can cycle through fuel economy, average speed, travel time, etc. This compact cargo van segment is very new to the United States, so it's very difficult to give the ProMaster City true comparisons to anything other than the NV200 or the Ford Transit Connect. It's very difficult to compare this to a traditional American minivan because this is a very different kind of vehicle. The average American minivan is really more of a large, heavy three-row crossover than something like this utility vehicle. It really shows when you take a look at the handling abilities of the ProMaster City or the NV200 or the Transit Connect. They're all relatively similar to one another. I think this handles a little bit better than the NV200, but not quite as well as the Ford. But all three of these small compact cargo vans handle much worse than your average minivan. So something like a Toyota Sienna, a Chrysler Town & Country, a Dodge Caravan, a Nissan Quest, etc. They're all going to handle better than this vehicle. A lot of that comes down to the suspension design, but a big portion of it comes down to the tires. These are quite simply narrower tires than you'll find on your average American minivan. Because competition is so difficult to discern for this vehicle, I'm going to compare this to your average minivan in this segment because I think commercial buyers may be tempted to buy something like a Dodge Grand Caravan for $21,000 and strip out the back portion of the interior and use it as a commercial vehicle rather than buying something like this that's a dedicated commercial vehicle. So with that in mind, I'm going to give this 6 out of 10 points when it comes to handling. This just doesn't handle as well, again, as your average American minivan. When it comes to acceleration, I'm also going to give this 6 out of 10 because most minivans in the United States have V6 engines. And this, very much like the NV200 and the Ford Transit Connect, have a 4-cylinder engine under the hood. The 4-cylinder engine means that we ran from 0 to 60 in 9.5 seconds in the ProMaster City, which is not a half bad number when you consider how heavy this vehicle is and how much power is under the hood. However, 9.5 seconds is a far cry from 7 seconds 0 to 60, which is pretty much what you'll get in any of the other minivans in this segment. The Dodge Grand Caravan, the Town & Country, the Toyota Sienna, the Honda Odyssey, they're all right around 7 seconds 0 to 60. Of course, the flip side to that is fuel economy, because this does get 29 miles per gallon on the highway. Although Honda claims 28 miles per gallon in the Honda Odyssey, it's a lot more difficult in that vehicle to get 28 miles per gallon than the 29 miles per gallon we're getting in this ProMaster City. The big thing to know, however, is that the faster you go out on the highway, the larger the delta will be between this RAM ProMaster City and any of those traditional minivans in this segment. That's simply down to this 9-speed automatic transmission. Ninth gear doesn't really engage till you're going well over 75 miles an hour, almost 80 miles an hour or so. So if you're really driving your ProMaster City fast out on those rural highways, or if you're in Texas with those 80-mile-per-hour speed limits, then you're definitely going to get much better fuel economy in this vehicle than in any of those other minivans, thanks to this 9-speed automatic transmission. The 9-speed automatic in the ProMaster really makes this the best feeling and best driving vehicle out on the road when you compare it with its direct competitors, and that would be the Ford Transit Connect as well as the NV200. We have an awful lot more gears to choose from, and that really makes a big difference in terms of drivability. I was actually surprised by the 9.5-second 0 to 60 time in this vehicle. I thought it would really be more like 8 seconds, but it actually turned out to be 9.5. And the reason for that difference between my feeling and the actual number is this 9-speed automatic. It feels an awful lot peppier, an awful lot zippier around town than you might think. It all comes down to the transmission being able to choose from a wider variety of ratios that are better fitting to your situation. In that respect, this behaves a little bit more like your average CVT, except that it can change ratios faster than a CVT, so it helps you accelerate, especially in passing maneuvers, a little bit faster. Of course, Chrysler has also made the throttle programming and the transmission programming a little bit more aggressive than you might expect to help the ProMaster feel a little bit zippier around town. Since I've already touched on fuel economy, let's dig a little deeper. I'll give this 10 out of 10 points because I have been averaging about 23.5 miles per gallon in very mixed driving with an awful lot of highway driving, and I have been wandering around with a few hundred pounds in the back just to see how this behaves. That is significantly higher than you'll get in any of the other minivans in this segment. Something like a Toyota Sienna or even Chrysler's own Town & Country or even that Honda Odyssey, they're all hovering right around 19 or 20 miles per gallon, and this is about 25% better. That's a pretty big difference. Again, if your commute is very highway heavy, you will see an even larger difference between this and any of those other entries in the segment. When it comes to braking, I'll give this 6 out of 10 points. I was a little bit disappointed by the brakes in this vehicle. They are definitely better than the NV200, both in terms of distance and in terms of brake feel. Not quite as good as the Ford Transit Connect, but most importantly, your average passenger minivan also scores better than this thanks to the wider tires. The ride is surprisingly well composed in the ProMaster City for a vehicle that has cargo hauling in mind. I'll give this 8 out of 10 points. We are in the Wagon version, which means we do have the middle bench seat in this vehicle. There is no third row seat in the ProMaster City in the United States. There is a Fiat version in Europe that does have a third row option, but that's not available in the US. The ride in the ProMaster is well controlled, and the suspension never feels unsettled over broken pavement or this rough mountain road that we're on right here. And that's thanks to the independent suspension we have in the back. That's very different than what you'll find in the Nissan NV200, also known as the Chevy City Express, because that does not have an independent suspension in the back, and it does feel a little bit unsettled over broken pavement. The NV200 also feels a little bit more like a truck out on the road. The rear suspension is definitely sprung a little bit firmer, even though the weight capacity isn't as high as we get in this Ram. That really means it doesn't feel quite as composed or quite as car-like when you're driving it around. The 9-speed automatic transmission really comes into play on these uphill grades. This is an excellent transmission for the ProMaster City. If you want to know more about ZF's 9-speed automatic transmission, I suggest you watch my Acura TLX video review. That's because the TLX with the V6 uses essentially the same ZF 9-speed automatic transmission. It's used by Jaguar Land Rover Group as well as Acura and Chrysler at the moment. The big thing about this 9-speed is that it has a very deep first gear to help give you better off-the-line acceleration. It's pretty easy to spin the front tires on this if the road surface isn't perfect. But the shifts are also very fast and they're very smooth, and that really helps improve acceleration and overall driving ability in a vehicle that's this size with only about 178 horsepower under the hood. Now that the road is really starting to wind here, the other thing you'll notice about the ProMaster City is that the steering has very little feedback. It's not necessarily unusual in this very small segment with which the ProMaster competes, but this is not going to feel quite as nice out on the road to drive as your average American minivan. Because of the overall shape, the driver has an enormous amount of headroom, but taller drivers may need to be aware that the front seat doesn't move as far back as you might think, so taller drivers with longer legs may still have a little bit of a problem fitting in the vehicle. The ProMaster City is designed for people that need to carry cargo, but they don't need to carry as much cargo as you can jam in a full-size van like the full-size ProMaster. The ProMaster City is obviously more fuel efficient. It's also easier to park than that larger van. However, it's not necessarily more nimble because we have the same kind of turning radius in this vehicle that we do in the ProMaster. It's about 36 feet. Now that is still 4 feet shorter than the long wheelbase version of the Ford Transit Connect. However, it does mean that you cannot necessarily make a U-turn in a residential district with this vehicle. Compared to your average American minivan, we can't stick quite as much cargo in the back, but it is a little bit more practical for commercial loading, especially if you're using a forklift. The ProMaster City does not handle quite as well as the Transit Connect. It feels an awful lot more isolated behind the wheel, but it's definitely more of a driver's vehicle than the NV200. That NV200 is considerably slower than this because it only has about 130 horsepower under the hood. It does have a CVT to try and make the most of that, but when you load down that NV200, it is definitely sluggish. That brings me very neatly to pricing. Starting at $23,130 for the tradesman version, you'll notice this is a little bit more expensive than the NV200 or even Dodge's own Grand Caravan. If you want the SLT model, which is really where I would start this vehicle, $24,655. The SLT model, in addition to the body-colored bumpers and different mirror covers, we also get lumbar support for the driver, which is very important for me. The Wagon version that we're taking a look at right here started at $24,130. This particular model comes in right around $26,000. The SLT version of this Wagon, $25,655, and if you get it fully loaded, it will be under $30,000. In comparison, Nissan's NV200 is definitely inexpensive. Some might even call it cheap in comparison, starting just over $20,000. That's a pretty significant discount when we're talking about a vehicle like this. However, while the ProMaster City definitely feels Euro-funky, the interior of the NV definitely feels a little bit discount. It has an awful lot of parts that are shared with the Nissan Versa, which is a very inexpensive car in America. It's also very slow, with only 131 horsepower under the hood. It's a little bit smaller than this, and there is no passenger version. Thanks to Nissan's tiny engine and the Nissan CVT under the hood, we get incredible mileage in the city, but the highway mileage was actually a little bit lower than the ProMaster City. This is not a complaint that's unique to the Ram, but I wish compact cargo vehicles like this were a little bit more nimble for urban driving. That's especially true when you take a look at the Ford Transit Connect, because the long wheelbase version has a 40-foot turning circle, and that's pretty darn large. Still, the Transit Connect is only a little bit more expensive than this. It's honestly the best looking in this segment. It's also the most appropriate minivan alternative, which makes sense, as Ford doesn't have a traditional American minivan like Chrysler does. If you're looking for a minivan, Chrysler will sell you the Town & Country or the Grand Caravan. If you're looking for a cargo vehicle, they'll sell you one of these. On the Ford side, if you're looking for a minivan or a cargo vehicle, they will sell you the same vehicle. That's very obvious when you take a look at the options that are available in that Transit Connect. You can get things like dual zone climate control and leather seats, and you can also spend up to $33,000 on a fully loaded version. The Ford wins the beauty contest inside and out with a much more comfortable and practical interior, especially in the base versions. The top-end versions, once you get the lumbar support, it's just about as comfortable as the Transit Connect for the driver, but you get more rear passenger room and a little bit more passenger comfort in that Transit Connect. I'm going to gloss right over the Chevy City Express because it is exactly the same as the Nissan NV200 that I just talked about, except that it's a little bit more expensive, so it makes the worst value in this segment, in my opinion. I frequently say that the toughest competition frequently comes on the same dealer lot as the vehicle you're looking at. And that's certainly true of the ProMaster City, because you'll frequently find it on the same lot as the Dodge Caravan. The Dodge Caravan AVP gets 4 miles per gallon less than this, but has 105 more horsepower. It has a 6-speed automatic, not a 9-speed automatic, but it will still get you to 0-60 faster than this vehicle. And it will cost you $1,735 less. The big difference, of course, with the Caravan is that it's a passenger vehicle in that AVP version, so it seats 7. Now that could be a good thing, or it could be a bad thing, because if you're after carrying cargo, you may not want those seats in the back. Obviously, you could remove them and get a cargo vehicle, but you still won't get bifolding doors like we have in this vehicle. You'll get that hatch, which makes it less practical for forklift loading. However, if towing is your thing, that Caravan will also tow 3,600 pounds when properly equipped, even in that base AVP version. The ProMaster City gives you a few things that you can't get in the Caravan, of course, because you can get metal on the back instead of glass, which is what we have in this vehicle right here in the back. So you can't get that in the Caravan. It would be glass all the way around. You can also get bulkheads from the factory between the front passenger compartment and the cargo compartment in the cargo vehicles, and that really does help improve safety and security when you're carrying cargo that could hit you if you brake suddenly. The cargo partition is also reasonably priced, ranging from just over $300 to just under $500, depending on whether or not you want a window in it so you can see out of the back glass. Admittedly, I'm not your average car purchaser, but if it were me, I'd buy the Caravan AVP, and then I would rip out the interior in the rear if I wanted a cargo vehicle, or I would keep it so I could have the practicality of the 7-passenger seating when I needed it, and the large cargo volume when I didn't. If you're after a dedicated small cargo hauler, this is definitely the best vehicle in the segment. I would choose this over the long wheelbase version of the Transit Connect, especially if my employees were driving the vehicle, because then I'd care a little bit less about the looks on the vehicle. If, however, you're looking at a vehicle like this but you want to be able to carry passengers, then look no further than that Transit Connect. Even in the 7-passenger version, it's still very practical because of the way those seats fold flat into the floor. You get less cargo capacity in that Ford in the 7-passenger version than you do in the Wagon version of this, but it's still very high, and you still have the practicality of the optional split folding rear doors. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this is the 2015 Ram ProMaster City. Go ahead and click that subscribe banner at the bottom of your screen so you can be updated on all of my latest videos. You can also find me over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, over at Twitter as AlexNautos, and I'll see you next week.